Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Roadmaster Reflex Steering Stabilizer on a 2021 Winnebago Vista. The steering stabilizer is a pretty simple method of making sure that your wheels track straight, and it's accomplished by mounting up to the tie rod. That way when you steer, it's either going to compress the spring or bring it back to center by pulling it. So no matter which way you turn, it's going to want to always bring it back to that center, so that way it's tracking straight. So when you make those turns, or if you're hitting any crosswinds, big bumps, or uneven roads, that steering wheel is going to kind of track straight forward for you, and that way you're not having to really fight the wheel, which is going to reduce road fatigue and white knuckling while driving your RV. You're going to be taking off the nuts on your U-bolts, so that can be a little bit tricky depending on how old your RV is or what kind of conditions you drive in, but this plate bolts up. It's meant to mount up to this nice and easy. You'll use those factory nuts again, and then we just bolt up our shock, bolt down our bracket, and that's pretty much it. So it's pretty easy to do. You can do this on the ground to get this installed. It's going to get a little bit tight when you start using torque wrenches and things along those lines, but the simple concept of it is really just getting your two brackets mounted up, bolting everything together, and that's it. This heavy duty shock and spring combo are going to absorb those turns and really take that energy and want to bring that back. So when driving, you're really not fighting against it. It wants to center, but it just firms up the steering feel in a really nice way. It's going to just feel a little bit more confident while driving. So as you turn and your tie rods are moving, it'll either compress or it's going to pull this back in. Either way, it's going to bring you back to that center point where you set it. When I see the biggest difference after installing a steering stabilizer on an RV, it mostly comes down to these sharp turns here. So as I kind of make a loop here and I want to head straight, normally you can let the steering wheel go, and you can see we're still kind of cutting off to a left, whereas the steering stabilizer is going to bring it back to a straight line, which translates to less maneuvering of the wheel in tight spaces going back and forth. But also once you're out on the highway, that translates to just tracking a little bit straighter. You'll a lot of times feel a little bit more resistance in the steering wheel in a good way, because it is going to want to track straight. So that way if you do make a turn, you let go, it'll kind of bring you back to that center. So it just really makes to where fighting the steering wheel or the rotations like we see right here, it makes it a lot easier when it does bring it back. This is just a before to see how it is. We're going to pull this in the shop, get it installed, and see the difference that it makes. Beginner installation, you're going to want to be on some nice flat level ground and have your steering dead center, have your tires as straight as possible while doing this. Now, you're going to be doing this on the ground. We're obviously on a lift, so you can see this all a little bit easier at home, but it's going to be the same concept of we're going to accomplish the same goal here. We're going to start on the passenger side. So right behind the front beam for your axle, we have our U-bolts, and we're going to be taking these nuts off, and that's where we're going to put our bracket that we have eventually is going to bolt up to here, just like this. So we do need to take that factory nuts off. Now, this is a fairly new RV, but as we see corrosion here in the Midwest kind of built up, that can make for a difficult time getting these off. So I do recommend getting some penetrating oil. Just going to spray that down. And you're going to want 1 1/8" socket to knock these down. So I'll go ahead, try to get these taken off. Now we're going to grab our bracket, and the slotted portion is going to go towards the middle of the RV. You'll see that there is this kind of welded on bushing here. That's going to go towards the outside, so we'll just slide this up. And then we'll get our washers and our nuts just hand tighten on here for now, but we are going to put some thread lock on here. Probably won't come loose over time, but again, we do want to make sure that this is just going to be solid for the lifespan of the RV. So I'm going to go ahead, we'll start these, and then I'll grab the Loctite, which is included in the kit. That's a nice little added benefit. Now throughout the entire installation, all of our hardware is going to receive the thread lock that's included. So just make sure you're doing that as you're bolting everything together. Now we'll go ahead, we'll get these snug down, and then we're going to come back with a torque wrench. You're going to want at least a 1/2" torque wrench to accomplish the torque settings. They're found in the instruction manual. Just going to make sure that long term these are tight enough. So first we'll again get these snug. Now, if you need a torque wrench, you can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free. We are going to be using a torque wrench in future steps too, so it's definitely crucial to have this. Now you're going to grab your tie rod bracket, and we're going to be bolting this up on the tie rod a little bit offset from the oil pan, and we're just going to finger tight get this mounted up because we're going to mount the shock to it later, and we're probably going to be moving this, so just somewhere in this drop down portion should be good. Now on the bracket you'll have this hole that's going to go towards the front, and then you'll see this gusset here that should be on the bottom. So as we put this in place, we'll take our U-bolts, slide this over, and then we're going to put the flat washer on each of them, as well as the nylon lock nut, and just finger tight for now, just to kind of hold this in place. Included with your kit is going to be two different size bolts. One's 3.5 inch, one's 3 inch, and this is what's going to mount up our shock. We're going to grab the 3.5 inch first, and we should have the nylon lock nut and washers there. We'll take those off. We'll drop our bolt down through this section here that has the bracket, and then we're going to put a flat washer on there, and grab your shock, and we're going to slide the lower portion up on here. And then once you have that in place, you put another flat washer, and then we're just going to finger tight the nylon lock nut in place. And then we'll grab our tie rod bracket. We're going to place the bolt through here, going vertically up. We'll put a flat washer, slide on our shock, put another flat washer, and then nylon lock nut. And then we'll just hand tight this. So all of our hardware is in place. I'm going to just go ahead with that thread lock and get all of my hardware coated up with that. And as far as tightening them down in a sequence, they don't really state in the instructions the best way to do that, but I recommend doing our longer 3 and 3.5 inch bolts, and that way it's kind of in place on the bracket, and then naturally we can figure out where this is sitting and tighten down our U-bolts. So there are torque settings associated with it, so I'm just going to go ahead and get these snug down first. And these larger 3 inch and 3.5 inch bolts and nuts are going to be a 3/4 inch socket to accomplish that. And don't over tighten these because the torque setting is fairly low on these. Just make sure that they're snugged up. And then as far as our U-bolts and our tie rod bracket, just kind of make sure that it's sitting naturally here, but we want our bracket, or at least with the mounting point, to be as level as possible. So kind of hold that in place, and then we can go ahead and start snugging down our U-bolts. Now these are going to be a 9/16 socket to accomplish that. And when tightening U-bolts, obviously make sure the bracket's straight, but also kind of go back to one side and then the other. Don't just fully crank on it. You want it nice and evenly tightened. So we'll go ahead and get this snug down. Now we'll just go back and get these all torqued down. So make sure you're changing your torque setting and following the instructions. That way we can get these properly torqued. With everything torqued down properly, we've officially installed our steering stabilizer. Now the fun part, you get to go out and see the difference it makes. Now if it's pulling to one side or the other, chances are there's just a little bit too much pressure here on the bracket. And what I recommend doing is get a paint marker or something to mark off where your brackets are. And that way you have a reference to kind of go back where you were before. And then as far as adjusting, just loosen these up, move the bracket I would go about 1/8 of an inch at a time and see if that gets better until you get it driving perfectly straight. Now back out on our test course, we're going to make some turns and see how it affects it. Pretty close immediately of pulling this out of the bay. I could tell just as I was turning the steering wheel to back it out. It is a stiffer feel, but as I mentioned, it's much better. In fact, a lot of times some of the cars with really good handling have a heavy steering feel. You get a little bit more input. It's not as loosey-goosey, which is a good thing. So as I make this turn, before I let go of the steering wheel, this way, when I let go of it, it's going to start tracking straight immediately. So let's go down this straight road, make sure we have it properly aligned. Everything's tracking straight here. We're going to make another big loop. And just the input here alone from the steering wheel, as I make a turn, you may not see right away that the steering wheel is going exactly back to normal, but when I make this turn, I'll let go of the steering wheel, and that's where it's going to start to kind of counter steer for you, which is really nice. Pretty sharp turn here, and then as I'm heading straight, whew, it definitely brings it back to center a lot quicker than before. It's not lingering, still kind of cutting over to the side. It really does just put it straight. And that was a look and installation of the Roadmaster Reflex Steering Stabilizer on a 2021 Winnebago Vista.